snow thickened against the windshield, swallowing the headlights as if the world beyond the glass no longer existed. The engine hummed, but the heat barely touched the edges of the frost creeping along the dashboard. Dana shifted in her seat, rubbing her hands together, eyes flicking toward the phone on the passenger seat. No signal. The road, once visible beneath a soft layer of snow, had disappeared entirely, blending into the white void pressing against every side of the car. The wipers groaned, smearing ice more than clearing it. She leaned closer, trying to catch a glimpse of anything familiar. She had driven this route dozens of times, but the storm warped everything, bending the dark trees lining the highway, until they looked more like looming shadows than branches. The gas gauge hovered just above empty. She pressed her foot against the brake, contemplating turning back, but the thought of reversing blindly into nothing felt worse than sitting still. A noise, faint, rhythmic. She turned off the radio. The thudding wasn't external, not the wind or shifting snow. It was inside the car, steady as a heartbeat. Dana froze, listening intently. Her eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty, dark fabric and scattered bags. Still, the sound persisted, gentle but insistent, like someone tapping their knuckles against the far corner of the trunk. She forced a laugh, too sharp to sound real, and exhaled fog against the window. Her nerves, she told herself, isolation and exhaustion playing tricks, but her hands trembled as she clicked the interior light on. The tapping stopped. She twisted in her seat, scanning the back seat again. Her reflection stared back from the rear window, pale-faced and anxious. The silence that followed was heavier than the snow piling against the tires. The sound returned, this time closer. Dana could feel it more than hear it, like soft thuds beneath her feet, pressing up from under the floor of the car. Her breath hitched. She flicked the radio back on, craving some kind of distraction. Static filled the cabin, crackling like ice breaking beneath footsteps. Through the distortion, faint voices emerged, soft, distant, and familiar. Her mother's voice drifted through the interference, calling her name the way she used to when Dana was a child playing outside after dark. Dana swallowed hard, twisting the dial. The station wavered but never cleared. Her father's voice followed, layered beneath her mother's, speaking words she couldn't make out, but she felt the weight of them, the way they stretched through the interference like fingers reaching for her. "Come home," the voices whispered in unison, faint but distinct. Dana's hand hovered over the volume knob, shaking. The back of her throat tightened. Her parents had been gone for years. She closed her eyes, shaking her head. Just exhaustion, she thought. But the next words made her eyes snap open. "You're not alone," her mother's voice murmured. Dana's gaze shot to the rearview mirror again, but the back seat remained empty. Still, she couldn't shake the sensation of someone watching her from just out of sight. Her stomach twisted as the tapping resumed, this time from inside the trunk, sharper, more insistent. She held her breath and reached behind her seat, pulling the lever that popped open the trunk. The faint creak of the latch echoed louder than it should have in the storm. Slowly, Dana stepped out of the car, the wind biting into her skin through her thin jacket. Snowflakes swirled around her, limiting her vision to just a few feet ahead. The trunk stood open, empty except for a blanket and an old ice scraper. She scanned the snow behind the car, half expecting footprints, but there were none. Still, the feeling of being watched gnawed at the edges of her mind. Dana quickly shut the trunk and slid back into the driver's seat, locking the doors. The car shifted, rocking slightly as if weight had settled somewhere unseen. Dana's breath quickened. She tried to rationalize it. Settling snow, a gust of wind. But the sensation felt deliberate, as though something had climbed atop the vehicle, waiting. She strained to hear over the storm, pressing her ear against the cold window. There it was, soft, scraping, moving slowly across the roof. Dana fumbled for the keys, turning them in the ignition. The engine sputtered but didn't catch. Again, a hollow click. She slammed her hand against the steering wheel, the sound cracking through the quiet like a gunshot. Silence followed. The scraping stopped. The snow against the windshield shifted slightly, not from the wind, but from above, sliding in patterns that mimicked long, narrow fingers. Her heart hammered as she pressed herself deeper into the seat, eyes locked on the swirling snow ahead. The radio continued its static murmur, but Dana didn't dare touch it again. Her hand drifted toward her phone, but the screen still flashed. No signal. She thought about stepping outside, braving the cold to search for help, but something told her she wouldn't be alone if she left the car. She stared at the frost creeping across the windshield. Shapes moved in the snow, silhouettes that vanished when she tried to focus on them. Time stretched, and the cold seeped deeper into the car, making her shiver uncontrollably. She didn't remember falling asleep, but when her eyes snapped open, the interior of the car was coated in a thin layer of frost. The dashboard clock was frozen at 3:15 a.m., and the gas gauge had dipped far below empty. Dana's breath fogged the air, but she barely noticed. The voices had returned, faint and overlapping, but no longer comforting. They whispered things she didn't understand, weaving through the static like threads binding her to the seat. A shadow passed the windshield, just beyond the reach of the headlights. Dana didn't move. The weight on the roof shifted again, and for a moment, she thought she saw something press against the glass. A pale handprint, melting the frost from the outside. She didn't look up. Her heart pounded in her throat as she sat frozen, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The snow continued to fall, burying the car deeper as the night stretched on. The gas gauge dipped further, the engine's hum fading into stillness. In the end, the blizzard took everything: the road, the car, and eventually, Dana. The next morning, when the snow cleared, there was nothing left but empty white plains stretching endlessly under the pale winter sun.